The stars in the sky gleamed like diamonds, but Commander Vorn's focus was entirely on the small blue planet ahead of him, Earth, a primitive world, full of weak humans, or so he thought. Vorn stood tall at the bridge of his mighty warship, his eyes scanning the planet below, already preparing to crush the species he had heard so much about. He had conquered many worlds in his long life. Zarfit was a mighty empire, feared across the galaxy. Their technology, their weapons, their ships, nothing could stand in their way. Vorn had fought against the strongest of alien forces, defeating them without breaking a sweat. But now his next target was Earth, and he couldn't help but laugh at the thought. How could such a small, weak planet even be a threat? He had been told that humans fought wars in the distant past, using nothing but guns and knives. Ridiculous. As the ship came closer to Earth's atmosphere, Vorn leaned back in his chair, chuckling. "I've heard the stories," he said, speaking to his lieutenant, Zala, who stood at attention beside him. "Humanity's so-called wars are nothing more than child's play. They don't stand a chance." Zala did not speak immediately. She had heard the stories too, but something about the humans made her uneasy. She wasn't sure why, but there was something about their survival instinct that always made her think twice. She had read their history, their countless battles for survival, and while their technology was far behind the Zarfit, their ability to endure was something to respect. Still, she kept her concerns to herself. "You are probably right, Commander," Zala replied, her voice calm. "But I have to admit, I am curious. What if we are underestimating them?" Vorn smiled, a confident, mocking smile. "Curious, Lieutenant? They are nothing. Let's see how well they do when we show them real power." The ship entered Earth's atmosphere with ease, its engines roaring as it descended toward a barren stretch of land. The Zarfit warship was massive, sleek, and filled with advanced technology. Nothing on Earth could compare. Vorn could hardly contain his excitement as the ship touched down, and the ramp lowered with a loud hiss. The first human soldiers greeted them. They stood in a line, dressed in worn-out armor, holding rifles that looked outdated compared to the advanced weaponry of the Zarfit. Vorn couldn't help but smirk. These people weren't warriors. They were survivors, nothing more. Weak, afraid, and soon to be crushed under the might of the Zarfit Empire. "Look at them," Vorn scoffed, turning to Zala. "They still think they can fight. What do they have? Old guns and rusty tanks. This is almost laughable." He took a few steps forward, his boots echoing in the silent air. The humans stood still, watching him, their expressions unreadable. He approached one soldier, who was a little older than the others. The soldier's face was scared, eyes hard with experience. He had seen the horrors of war. He was not afraid. "You must be the leader of these pathetic humans," Vorn said with a cold laugh. "You're supposed to be a mighty warrior, I assume. Tell me, what makes you think you can stand against the Zarfit?" The soldier didn't flinch. His eyes never left Vorn. He didn't speak at first, just stood tall, looking up at the towering alien. "I don't think we're going to stand against you," the soldier finally replied, his voice calm but firm. "I know we can't, but we won't run. That's something you'll see soon enough." Vorn's face twisted into a sneer. "You humans, and your bravado. It won't matter. You'll be wiped out, just like the rest." He turned and walked away, his confidence unwavering. But then something strange happened. As he walked toward the human camp, he noticed an ancient warship parked nearby. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades, perhaps centuries. The ship was old, covered in rust, and yet there was something oddly familiar about it. It was a ship built by humans, from a time long before their planet had been united under any kind of technological empire. "What is this?" Vorn asked, his curiosity piqued for the first time. He stopped, staring at the ship. The soldier, who had followed him, smiled faintly. "That's the Argo, one of our old battleships. It saw some of the worst fighting our species ever faced. Back when we had to fight with everything we had, when we had nothing but will and strength." Vorn raised an eyebrow. Will and strength, he asked, mocking the idea. How quaint. As Vorn continued to inspect the old ship, a strange sense of unease began to form in the back of his mind. The Argo was a relic, yes, but it had survived wars that should have wiped out humanity. And for a moment, he wondered, what had truly happened here on Earth? Could this planet's past wars be so significant, so intense, that even the Zarfid might have underestimated them? No, he couldn't let his doubts take root. Humans were weak. The Zarfid had already seen and destroyed civilizations far more powerful than this. They were nothing but a blip in the galaxy. Let's go, Vorn said, waving away the thoughts that had begun to form. We have a war to win. But as he walked away, a strange feeling lingered, a feeling that he couldn't quite shake. Maybe it was the Argo and its ancient battle scars, or maybe it was the way that human soldier had stood so tall in front of him. Whatever it was, Vorn had no idea that his perception of humanity would soon be shattered in the most unexpected way. The humans weren't done. They were just getting started. And Vorn's mockery would soon turn to fear. Commander Vorn stood at the front of the camp, his arms crossed and his eyes locked onto the horizon. He couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled deep inside him after seeing the old human battleship, the Argo. The ship was nothing more than an old relic, but something about it made him pause. The soldier's words echoed in his mind, will and strength. Zala, his ever-loyal lieutenant, stood beside him. She noticed the tension in Vorn's posture, the way his gaze seemed distant. He wasn't usually one to doubt himself. Commander, she said cautiously, is something wrong? Vorn didn't answer immediately. His mind was still reeling. He had seen countless species fall before the might of the Zarfid fleet, but humanity was different. They didn't have advanced technology or powerful weapons, yet they had survived. And more than that, they had done so for centuries. His mind couldn't fully grasp it. How could a species that barely knew the stars fight so fiercely? He turned to Zala with a dismissive shrug. It's nothing, he said coldly. I'm just ready for this to be over. We'll wipe them out in hours. Zala nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. She had seen doubt in his eyes earlier, and she knew it wasn't like him to underestimate an enemy. But she chose not to press him further. After all, they were Zarfid, and they had always won. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Vorn's forces began to prepare for the assault. The Zarfid fleet had already moved into position, ready to launch their attack on Earth. The planet's military defenses were weak, and Vorn knew they wouldn't last long against the might of his ships. The humans were brave, yes, but they lacked the firepower to stand a chance. On the other side, the humans were doing everything they could to prepare for the inevitable. They had mobilized what little they had, old fighter jets, battered tanks, and makeshift defenses. But there was one thing they still had: determination. They were prepared to fight to the last man, no matter the cost. General Stewart, the leader of Earth's defense forces, stood before a group of his soldiers, rallying them for the fight ahead. We may not have their technology, he said, his voice filled with resolve. But we have something they'll never understand: the will to survive. They think they've won before they even start. But that's where they're wrong. We've fought wars for centuries. We've survived the worst. And we're not going down without a fight. The soldiers around him nodded, their faces set in grim determination. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for their families, their homes, and for every human who had ever come before them. This was their fight for survival. Back at the Zarfid camp, Vorn was already growing impatient. He watched the humans from a distance as they scrambled to get their defenses in place. He couldn't help but sneer. Weak, he thought. Pathetic. They couldn't even organize a proper defense. Prepare the weapons, Vorn commanded. This will be over soon. The Zarfid fleet moved into position, their ships hovering in low orbit above the planet. The warships were armed with laser cannons, missile launchers, and other advanced weaponry that could wipe out entire cities in seconds. Vorn was confident that this would be another easy victory. After all, humans had no real weapons to match the sheer power of the Zarfid. But then something strange happened. A flash of light lit up the sky, followed by a loud boom as a missile shot into the air from Earth's surface. Vorn's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected the humans to strike first. He thought they would cower, waiting to be wiped out. "Is this some kind of desperate attack?" Zala asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Vorn's expression was cold, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "No, it's a message," he muttered. "They're not running. They're not hiding. They're fighting." The missile shot toward the Zarfid fleet with terrifying speed. It wasn't a large missile by their standards, but it was precise. Vorn's ship, and many others in the fleet, took defensive maneuvers. But the missile didn't stop there. It exploded in a bright burst of light, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. The Zarfid warships took damage. The blast wasn't enough to cripple them, but it sent a shock through the fleet. For a moment, Vorn was stunned. This wasn't what he had expected. The humans were fighting back, and they were doing it with everything they had. "Fire!" Vorn shouted, his voice filled with rage. "Destroy them all." The Zarfid fleet unleashed a barrage of fire, but the humans weren't just standing still. They had taken the fight to the sky. Dozens of fighter jets rocketed into the air, their engines screeching. Though they were small and old, the humans' fighter jets were fast and nimble, able to dodge the Zarfid's massive weaponry with surprising agility. They fired back with missiles of their own, their targets locked on to the Zarfid ships above. Vorn's expression changed. He had assumed this would be an easy victory, a quick conquest. But these humans were different. They were determined, and their tactics were unpredictable. They didn't fight like anyone he had ever encountered before. They fought like they had nothing to lose. Vorn's grip tightened on the railing as the battle intensified. He had expected to crush these humans, to make them bow to the mighty Zarfid Empire. But instead, they were showing him something he had never seen, a species that would never surrender, no matter the odds. The human fighter jets continued to attack, swarming around the Zarfid fleet like angry bees. The alien soldiers on board the ships were starting to panic, unsure of how to handle this unexpected resistance. Vorn's thoughts began to race. The humans weren't just fighting back with their technology. They were fighting with something far more powerful, their will to survive. "Zala, I want every ship to focus on those jets," Vorn ordered. "Do not let them escape. Do not underestimate them again." As the battle raged on, Vorn realized something he hadn't considered before. The humans were not afraid. Despite their outdated technology and their small numbers, they fought with everything they had. And that was something the Zarfid Empire had never truly faced before. This would be a battle like no other. The battle had escalated quickly. Commander Vorn stood on the bridge of his flagship, his fists clenched as he watched the chaos unfolding before him. His fleet, once so confident in its superior strength, was now struggling to maintain control. The human fighters darted through the skies with surprising speed, their missile launches creating a beautiful but deadly dance of explosions. Every time one of Vorn's ships fired, a human fighter would swoop in, dodging the blasts and returning fire. Zala stood beside him, eyes glued to the screens. "We've underestimated them, Commander," she said quietly, her voice tinged with both concern and awe. "These humans, they're not as weak as we thought." Vorn didn't respond at first. His focus was intense, trying to make sense of this unexpected resistance. Humans, weak, unremarkable creatures. They had no advanced technology, no real defense systems to speak of. And yet, here they were, holding their own against the Zarfid warships with raw, unrelenting force. "It's not their technology that's making them difficult to deal with," Vorn muttered. "It's their determination, their will to survive." He was right. The human pilots had no fear in their eyes, no hesitation in their movements. They were skilled, their old warships moving like well-oiled machines. It wasn't just their technology that made them dangerous. It was their spirit, something that made them stand out from every other species Vorn had encountered. "Prepare the ground forces," Vorn ordered abruptly, his voice cold but filled with a new sense of urgency. "We will eliminate them from the ground. If their air force can't be stopped, we'll wipe out their defenses from below." The alien warships began to deploy drop pods, sending squads of Zarfid soldiers to the surface of Earth. The humans, however, had not been caught off guard. The planet's atmosphere may have been in chaos, but the soldiers on the ground were well prepared. They had spent years training for this moment, for the day when humanity would have to face an enemy like the Zarfid. General Stewart stood in his command center, eyes darting across the screens showing the locations of the incoming Zarfid pods. The news had spread quickly. Aliens were invading Earth. The very thought of it was terrifying, but it wasn't the first time humanity had fought for its survival. And like always, it wouldn't be the last. "We'll meet them head-on," General Stewart said, his voice calm despite the incoming danger. "Send the infantry to the drop zones. Hold nothing back. We fight for every inch." The ground forces readied themselves, armored in heavy gear, rifles in hand, and heartbeats steady. They didn't have the advanced weaponry of the Zarfid, but they had something more: resilience. Humanity's wars had forged them into a people who would never back down, no matter the odds. The Zarfid soldiers landed in fiery explosions, emerging from their pods in full battle armor, weapons raised, eager to crush the humans underfoot. But as they advanced, they were met with an unexpected sight. The humans didn't run. They didn't panic. They fought. The first wave of Zarfid invaders was met with a barrage of human fire. The guns they carried may have been old, but they were efficient. Every shot, every grenade, every bullet had purpose. The humans weren't just firing at random. They were strategically striking at the weak points of the enemy, targeting vital systems on the Zarfid soldiers' armor. The battle on the ground was brutal. The Zarfid soldiers, trained in years of advanced combat, weren't used to such tenacity. They couldn't comprehend how the humans, with their outdated technology, could hold their own. At one drop zone, a Zarfid commander ordered his troops to advance, confident they would crush the human resistance within minutes. But his face changed when a human soldier, covered in dust and blood, rushed forward. He threw a grenade that struck the commander's unit, sending several Zarfid soldiers into the air with a loud explosion. The soldiers' eyes were full of fury, determination, and something else, a deep-rooted anger at anyone who would threaten their home. Vorn watched the ground battle unfold through his ship's monitors. He had expected the humans to falter, to panic under pressure. But that wasn't happening. Instead, they were adapting, changing their tactics with every moment. They weren't perfect, but their resilience was undeniable. His confidence began to slip. This was no longer a one-sided conflict. "Commander, they're hitting us hard," Zala said, noticing the shift in the tide of the battle. "Their ground forces are using guerrilla tactics. They know their terrain. We're at a disadvantage." Vorn gritted his teeth. "Impossible," he growled. "These creatures shouldn't be able to keep up with us. We have the superior technology. We have the weapons." Zala looked at him, her face shadowed with uncertainty. "Their resolve is unmatched. We've underestimated them." As the hours dragged on, Vorn felt the reality of the situation sink in. Despite their technological advantage, despite their massive fleet and superior firepower, the Zarfid were being outfought on the ground. The human spirit was something they hadn't anticipated. And no matter how many soldiers they sent, the humans didn't seem to break. They survived. And with every wave of attacks, they only grew more determined. Vorn knew this wasn't just a military battle. This was a test of wills. And for the first time in his career, the Zarfid Empire was not winning. Zala turned to him, her voice filled with disbelief. "Commander, they're using the same tactics we taught our enemies centuries ago. They're not just surviving. They're fighting. Fighting like we did." Vorn's expression turned to one of deep thought. He had assumed this war would be over quickly. He had assumed he could wipe them out without even breaking a sweat. But now he realized that the humans were not like the others. They had a strength that transcended technology. It was in their blood, in their history, and in the way they would never, ever back down. This was only the beginning, and the Zarfid Empire was in for a fight it had never seen before. The real question was, could they survive the fury of humanity? As the days passed, Commander Vorn watched helplessly as his once confident fleet struggled to regain control. The human resistance wasn't faltering. It was growing stronger. With every wave of the Zarfid assault, the humans adapted, their tactics becoming more sophisticated. And worse for the invaders, they seemed to be gaining ground in a war that had, at first, seemed destined to be one-sided. The humans weren't just surviving. They were fighting back. What Vorn had initially dismissed as desperation was, in reality, a carefully calculated response. They were using every tool at their disposal, making use of terrain, resourcefulness, and old-fashioned grit to push back against the mighty Zarfid war machine. On the battlefields, Earth's soldiers had started to show signs of unity that Vorn hadn't expected. The humans who had once been divided by borders and nations were now united by one common goal: to protect their home. Vorn had underestimated the strength of their collective will. Meanwhile, on the Zarfid flagship, the atmosphere was tense. The battle was not going as planned. Vorn could feel the pressure mounting, his patience thinning with each passing day. The humans had used guerrilla tactics to great effect, launching surprise attacks that crippled their infrastructure and caused damage to critical supply lines. But more troubling was the human resolve. The longer they fought, the stronger they seemed. Zala stood beside the commander, her face grave. "Commander, the ground forces are struggling. We've deployed over 1,000 soldiers, and still the humans persist. Their military bases are more fortified than we anticipated. It's as if they're prepared for this kind of war." Vorn's fists clenched. Prepared. He spat the word. "This is madness. They should have crumbled by now." "They're not like the other species we faced," Zala said. "The humans have been at war for centuries. They've fought for survival before. They've faced greater odds than this. They don't just fight to win. They'd fight to survive." Vorn turned sharply, his expression cold. "Survive," he repeated. "Is that what this is about? I'm not interested in what they survive. They will be crushed, just like the others." But even as he spoke the words, he couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that something was different. The humans weren't just fighting with weapons, they were fighting with something far more dangerous. The will to endure. Vorn had seen species collapse under pressure, their resolve breaking when faced with the overwhelming might of the Zarfid. But the humans, they stood tall. Their fighters continued to rise into the air despite the losses. Their soldiers kept pushing forward, and their global defense network held strong. On Earth, General Stewart stood in his command center, analyzing the battlefield. The tide had begun to shift, and the Zarfid's massive firepower was no longer a guarantee of victory. Humanity's will to fight had taken them to places no invader had ever imagined. Stewart's voice was calm, but his eyes burned with the fury of a man who had seen his people's resilience firsthand. "Hold the line," he said firmly to his officers. "The Zarfid thought they could break us. Now, it's our turn to show them what humanity is capable of. We fight not for victory, but for survival. We fight because we can." The humans had been pushed back to their last remaining strongholds. Their armies had been whittled down, but they refused to yield. Earth's cities were filled with refugees, but the fighting spirit was stronger than ever. Every neighborhood, every street, every soldier knew that this wasn't just a battle for territory. It was a fight for existence. As night fell, the human forces launched their next counter-offensive, using old weapons, improvised rockets, EMP bombs, and cyber attacks. The humans crippled several Zarfid warships. They didn't have the technological advantage, but they made up for it with creativity. The Zarfid fleet, which had once been invincible in Vorn's eyes, was now caught off guard, unable to defend against the guerrilla-style attacks that seemed to come from every direction. "This isn't possible," Vorn muttered under his breath as the Zarfid flagship took another hit. "We've outgunned them in every way, and still they fight." Zala stepped forward, her tone heavy with understanding. "Commander, they're not just using their weapons. They're using everything they've learned. Their battles are not fought with technology alone, but with the experiences of every war they've survived. They've learned from every defeat, every loss. They know what it means to fight when there's nothing left." Vorn didn't want to admit it, but she was right. This battle wasn't just about tactics or firepower. It was about humanity's spirit. They had faced endless wars, and each time they had emerged with even greater resolve. This was a strength Vorn had never anticipated, and it was beginning to shake his confidence. "We are losing," Zala said quietly, as she watched the reports of further damage to their ships. "The humans are making headway. Their resistance is too fierce." The realization hit Vorn like a physical blow. For the first time, he felt uncertainty grip his chest. The humans had always been a species he dismissed as insignificant, but now, standing at the brink of the battle's turning point, he saw them for what they were, a species that refused to bow. They fought not just to defend their planet, but for the very idea of survival itself. Vorn stared at the screens in front of him, his mind racing. This wasn't just an invasion anymore. This was a war that would define the fate of the Zarfid Empire. And for the first time in his long career, Vorn wasn't sure they could win. Back on Earth, the human forces pushed harder, the tide turning with every battle. They were united, driven by the thought that their survival was worth any cost. Commander Vorn had underestimated humanity, and now he would learn just how much they were capable of when backed into a corner. This war wasn't over. Not yet. And for the Zarfid Empire, that was the most terrifying realization of all. The battlefield was filled with the sounds of explosions, gunfire, and the distant hum of Zarfid warships as they patrolled the skies. The human forces had fought valiantly, but the odds had steadily been stacked against them. Cities lay in ruins, landscapes were scared with the remnants of battle, and yet humanity refused to surrender. The Zarfid Empire had never encountered a species that could withstand their might, let alone challenge it. And now, they were faced with the hardest decision of all. Should they press on and crush humanity once and for all, or should they acknowledge that they had underestimated their enemies? Commander Vorn stood in his command center, the weight of the situation pressing on him. His fingers drummed against the console as he scanned the status reports. His fleet, though still intact, was badly damaged. The humans, despite their outdated weaponry, had managed to disrupt their communications, cripple key systems, and destroy valuable supply routes. The Zarfid military, once an unstoppable force, now seemed vulnerable. Vorn's mind raced, trying to devise a new plan to ensure his victory, but every idea he considered seemed to fall short. "This is madness," Vorn muttered under his breath. "How are they doing this? How are they still standing?" Zala stood next to him, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at the screen showing the chaotic ground battles below. "They've done the impossible, Commander. Their tactics, they're not just surviving, they're winning." She paused before adding, "We never considered how deeply ingrained their will to fight truly is." Vorn turned to her, frustration evident on his face. "We cannot afford to lose this war. We have to crush them, and we need to do it now before their resistance spreads further." On the surface of Earth, the last line of human defense was beginning to take shape. General Stewart had gathered his remaining troops and had dug in. The battle for Earth had come down to this single moment, the final stand of humanity. If they lost, Earth would be destroyed, and the Zarfid would claim the planet as their own. But if they won, it would be a victory that sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Humanity had no choice but to fight. Stuart addressed his soldiers as they prepared for the final battle. His voice rang out, filled with the authority of a man who knew what was at stake. This is it, our last stand. But remember, we are not alone in this fight. We stand for every human who ever fought for their freedom, for every family that's ever dreamed of peace, for every child that has ever hoped for a better future. We are the last bastion of human civilization. The Zarfid will not take our home from us. Not today. Not ever. The soldiers erupted into cheers, their resolve hardening. They had fought in countless skirmishes, lost friends and comrades along the way. But now they stood united in the belief that they would not let the Zarfid take Earth without a fight. The Zarfid ground forces had already begun their advance, the heavy thud of their boots shaking the ground as they neared the last stronghold. The humans had prepared their defenses, bunkers, hidden traps, and weapons left over from previous wars. But it would not be enough if they didn't hold their ground long enough for the final counteroffensive to take shape. On the battlefield, General Stuart saw his soldiers take their positions. Each one knew what they were risking. Most of them would never see the light of another day. But they fought for each other, for Earth, and for the future of their species. Courage burned in their hearts. Vorn, meanwhile, was not unaware of the human soldiers' growing resolve. His fleet was close to Earth now, hovering just above the final defensive positions. They had come this far. The Earth's defenses were weakening, but humanity had once again managed to find ways to fight back. Improvised weapons, guerrilla tactics, and the unyielding human spirit. This cannot go on, Vorn said, frustration lining his voice. He knew the human resistance was formidable, but he had a trick up his sleeve. He had come to Earth with overwhelming force, but he had one final devastating weapon that could end the fight once and for all. A deadly energy weapon capable of obliterating entire cities with a single blast. If he could get close enough to the human stronghold, the battle would be over. But as he gave the orders to move forward, something unexpected happened. A message flashed on his screen. Humanity is not just fighting for survival. They are fighting for something greater than themselves. The message came from a decrypted transmission intercepted from the human resistance. It was a speech given by General Stuart before the final assault. Vorn listened intently, hearing the words that echoed through the airwaves. We will not surrender. Our strength is not in our weapons, but in our will to survive. We fight not just for our own lives, but for the future of those who will come after us. Our ancestors fought for us to be here today, and we will fight to ensure that future generations are free. This is our last stand, and we will make it count. Vorn's mind raced. The humans had faced worse odds before, but their words, their resolve, now showed him something he had not anticipated. The Zarfid Empire had encountered countless worlds, each more advanced than the last, but never had they faced a species that fought with such fury, such determination, and such an unbreakable spirit. For the first time in this campaign, Vorn felt doubt. What have we truly underestimated? He whispered to himself, standing motionless before the screen. He could feel the weight of his decision now. He had fought in many wars, but he had never encountered an enemy like this. The final assault on Earth was about to begin. Vorn could send in the full might of his fleet, deploying his deadly weapon to wipe out humanity's last resistance. The humans, however, would not give up without a fight. They were ready to make their stand, even if it cost them everything. Vorn faced a difficult truth. No matter what happened next, humanity had already proven itself to be a force to be reckoned with. Whether they won or lost, the humans had shown the universe that they were not to be underestimated. And so, the two forces faced each other, one with a powerful army, and the other with an unbreakable will. The fate of Earth and the future of humanity would soon be decided in the fiercest battle either side had ever known. The final battle for Earth had begun. The skies above the planet were filled with the ominous hum of Zarfid warships, massive, menacing structures capable of annihilating entire cities in a single blow. Yet, beneath this terrifying shadow, humanity stood defiant. Their forces, though battered and diminished, were still united by a single powerful truth: they would never surrender. General Stewart stood at the center of the command hub, overseeing the final preparations. The odds were against them, but the will to survive had forged a unity among Earth's defenders that Vorn, commander of the Zarfid forces, would never have anticipated. The human spirit was not something that could be easily crushed, and the Zarfid were now feeling the consequences of underestimating that spirit. As the battle began, the first wave of Zarfid bombardment rained down on the Earth's surface. The immense energy weapons fired, lighting up the skies with blinding bursts. Explosions rocked the planet. The Earth trembled beneath the fury of the attack. Yet, amid the chaos, Earth's counteroffensive was already in motion. Humanity had adapted quickly. Though their ships and weaponry paled in comparison to the technological might of the Zarfid, they had something more: the element of surprise and their unrivaled ability to think outside the box. Their forces struck from unexpected angles, utilizing cloaking devices, hacked communications, and cyber warfare to throw the Zarfid fleet into disarray. The human ships, small but agile, dodged the firepower of the massive Zarfid warships, launching precise strikes on key enemy vessels. Stewart's voice crackled over the communication lines to his troops. "We hold the line, soldiers. We fight for Earth. We fight for humanity's future." On the front lines, the human soldiers fought with everything they had. Their weapons might not have been the most advanced, but their resolve was unmatched. They fought in the ruins of their cities, using every resource available to them, from ancient tanks to improvised explosives, to push back the invaders. The Zarfid ground forces were not used to this kind of fight. They were trained to battle other technologically advanced species, not a species that relied on survival instincts and guerrilla warfare. The Zarfid had expected humanity to crumble under the pressure. Instead, they were surprised to find that humans were not afraid of death. They were driven by a far greater force: the need to protect their home. As the battle raged on, Commander Vorn paced back and forth on his flagship, growing increasingly frustrated. He had underestimated the fighting spirit of the humans. Their resistance had not only held but had managed to reverse the tide of battle. His fleet was beginning to show signs of wear and tear. His soldiers, though experienced and powerful, were starting to question the logic of the invasion. Their confidence was eroding, replaced by confusion and fear. "Commander, we've lost communication with the rear flank," reported Zala, her voice tense. "The human forces have launched a surprise attack, and they've taken out 2 of our supply ships." Vorn's hands clenched into fists. "Impossible. We outnumber them. We have the superior firepower. How could they be winning?" Zala stepped closer, her expression grim. "They're not just fighting with their weapons, Commander. They're fighting for their home, for everything they believe in. This isn't just a battle for Earth. It's a fight for survival." Vorn's mind was racing. Survival. He had heard the humans speak of it time and time again, but he had never truly understood it. The Zarfid Empire had conquered countless worlds, and yet none had ever fought back with the fury that humanity was displaying. On the surface, the human forces had gathered for what would likely be their final stand. Civilians had joined the military in defense of their home, abandoning the safety of shelters to join the resistance. They armed themselves with whatever they could find, whether it was old rifles or makeshift bombs. It didn't matter. Every person, no matter their age or status, was part of the fight. In the main battle zone, General Stewart watched as his forces moved into position, preparing for the decisive clash. He knew that if they didn't act now, Earth would be lost. But he also knew something that Vorn did not. The human will was more powerful than any weapon. Their unity, their desire to survive, gave them strength the Zarfid could not comprehend. The Zarfid flagship, a monstrous vessel capable of obliterating entire cities, was nearing its final approach. The last weapon in their arsenal, the planet-destroying energy cannon, was locked onto Earth's capital. It was the ultimate weapon, designed to wipe out the heart of any planet's resistance. Vorn gave the order: Prepare the energy cannon. Destroy the heart of Earth. But just as the weapon powered up, a human ship, a small but powerful stealth vessel, managed to slip past the enemy defenses. Its mission was clear: to destroy the energy cannon before it could fire. The human pilot, a young woman named Eva Johnson, had seen the destruction of her home city firsthand. She was determined that the human race would not go down without a fight. Her ship was heavily damaged, but it was still functional. With a grim expression, she initiated the final assault. Her target was the Zarfid flagship's central core. "This is for Earth," Eva whispered as she locked her missile launcher onto the Zarfid flagship. Her hands shook, but her resolve was unwavering. The world around her was falling apart, but this was her moment. The humans were fighting back, and she was part of that fight. With a sharp breath, she launched the missiles. The missiles screamed toward the flagship, and in a split second, the energy cannon was obliterated in a massive explosion. The Zarfid flagship trembled as the core of the vessel began to destabilize. The humans had done it. They had struck the heart of the Zarfid war machine. Chaos erupted among the Zarfid forces. Their communications scrambled. Their fleet lost cohesion as panic spread like wildfire. In the heat of the battle, Vorn stood stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Zala rushed to his side. "Commander, the energy cannon is destroyed. They've crippled us." Vorn's eyes burned with fury. How did they do this? How can they keep fighting? Zala didn't answer. She didn't need to. The answer was clear now. Humanity was not only capable of survival, they were capable of defying the impossible. The Zarfid Empire, in all its vast power, had underestimated the one thing they could never conquer: the human spirit. The battle was far from over, but one thing was certain: no matter how much the Zarfid tried to crush humanity, Earth's defenders would never give up. They had come this far, and they would see it through until the very end. Earth was still standing, and humanity's fight had only just begun. The aftermath of the battle left Earth's surface scorched, cities reduced to rubble, and the once proud human armies battered and weary. The invaders, the Zarfid, had come with the might to erase humanity from existence, but instead they were now retreating, disoriented and broken. The planet was not yet safe, and humanity knew that this war was far from over. But for the first time, the Zarfid Empire began to realize they were not facing just a species to conquer. They were facing a force that would never back down. General Stewart surveyed the battlefield from his command center, the weight of victory settling in with a quiet intensity. The Zarfid fleet, once an overwhelming presence in the skies, was now retreating in disarray. The Zarfid flagship, now a smoldering wreck, had been crippled by the human missile strike. Their technology, so advanced and fearsome, had been shattered by the very race they had so arrogantly sought to destroy. "It's not over yet," General Stewart muttered to himself, gazing out at the devastated landscape. He had won a major battle, but the war was far from won. His forces were exhausted, many of them wounded or dead. Still, there was something that kept them going, a fierce, unrelenting belief that Earth could not be conquered. Back in the wreckage of their capital cities, human civilians were pulling together, clearing debris, and rescuing survivors. The spirit of unity was evident in every street and every corner of what remained of the world. People who had once lived in fear, trapped in underground bunkers, now emerged, working side by side with the soldiers who had fought to protect them. It wasn't just the military anymore. Humanity as a whole had joined the fight. Meanwhile, the Zarfid forces, though far superior in firepower, had learned a terrifying truth: humans didn't fear death. They were capable of sacrifice on a scale the Zarfid couldn't comprehend. The Zarfid had believed themselves to be invincible, but humanity's ability to adapt, to think, to survive against all odds, was a force that even their greatest warships couldn't withstand. In the depths of space, Commander Vorn, leader of the Zarfid fleet, stood alone in the shattered remains of his flagship. His mind raced. He had been defeated, humiliated by a species he had considered primitive, weak. And yet, in his heart, he felt something he hadn't anticipated: fear. "We underestimated them," Vorn muttered. "They should have been annihilated in the first wave. How are they still standing?" Zala, his most trusted officer, stood nearby, her eyes hard. "The humans, they are unlike anything we've ever faced. They don't fight like other species. They fight with purpose, with heart." Vorn clenched his fists, frustration boiling over. The Zarfid Empire had faced wars with countless species, but none had ever fought back like this. None had been willing to sacrifice so much just to survive. The human spirit was an enigma, a power the Zarfid could never understand. It wasn't just about weapons or technology. It was about something deeper, something more primal. "They fought for their home," Zala said quietly. "They didn't give up when the odds were against them. It's not about their technology. It's about their will. And that, Commander, is something we can't conquer." Vorn stared into the distance, his mind grappling with the truth. He had come to Earth to conquer, to wipe out a species that had seemed like an easy target. But now, facing the remnants of the humans' resilience, he realized something. The humans weren't just surviving. They were winning. Back on Earth, General Stewart and his surviving officers were preparing for the next phase of the fight. The victory wasn't complete, not yet. But humanity had done the impossible. They had repelled an invasion that should have crushed them. And now, they were going to turn the tide. "We hold the line," General Stewart said firmly. "The Zarfid may have the numbers, but we have something they'll never understand: the will to protect our home." As the human forces regrouped, they began to launch counterattacks. What remained of the Zarfid fleet was now scattered, vulnerable. The humans, with their limited resources, used every bit of ingenuity at their disposal. The underground resistance movements, once thought to be a mere nuisance, now formed a network of intelligence and sabotage against the invaders. The Zarfid had underestimated humanity's adaptability, and it was a mistake they would not survive. General Stewart knew the final confrontation was coming. It wasn't going to be easy. The Zarfid Empire was a massive force, and their fleet might be crippled, but they still had devastating weapons. Yet humanity had something far more powerful: the unshakable belief that they would never fall. The battle for Earth was far from over, but humanity had sent a message that no one, not even the most advanced empire in the galaxy, could ignore. They were no longer a species to be taken lightly. With a final, resolute look at the horizon, General Stewart turned to his officers. "We have one chance to end this. We finish what we started, now." And as the remnants of the Zarfid fleet gathered themselves, they knew that the final reckoning was upon them. Earth was not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something much greater. For their future. For their freedom. For the legacy of their people. The Zarfid Empire would never forget the lesson they had learned that day. Humanity would never be defeated.